On June 4, 1943, inside the recreation hall at Camp Hearne, Texas, Oberleutnant Hermann Fischer's fountain pen quivered as he wrote in his hidden journal. He was documenting thoughts that would have gotten him beaten by his own SS guards had they been discovered back in Africa. The Americans, he wrote, were showing them their movies. Not state-produced propaganda, but actual Hollywood films. He believed what he saw that night couldn't possibly be real, convinced that no nation at war could possess such a capability. Through the projector's beam in the makeshift theater, he had just seen something that dismantled 4 years of Nazi conditioning. 200 German officers from Rommel's defeated Afrika Korps sat spellbound as Vivian Leigh moved across the screen in Gone with the Wind, a film that portrayed America's own Civil War, its own story of defeat and reconstruction. The spectacle of Technicolor, the grand orchestral music, and the sheer scale of the production astounded men who had been led to believe American culture was limited to jazz and gangster movies. Back in Germany, Goebbels's film industry could barely produce black and white propaganda shorts. Yet here, in a nation their leadership called a mongrel state of cultural inferiors, these prisoners of war watched a 4-hour epic produced for $385 million, a budget larger than that of the entire German film industry for a year. Just a day earlier, 1850 veterans of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps had stepped off the passenger train that brought them to Hearne. The small Texas town's entire population had gathered to observe their arrival. What nobody present understood was that this moment was the beginning of the most surprising psychological shift in the history of military detention. It marked a systematic reprogramming of Nazi beliefs, driven by the mesmerizing power of Hollywood's dream machine. The calculus of this ideological shift wasn't happening in interrogation rooms, but in darkened theaters where American movies flickered on wooden walls, projecting narratives that would demolish every preconceived notion these soldiers had about their foes, their nation, and the New World Order they had fought for. The surrender had occurred on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, who had taken over from the famed Rommel, capitulated along with roughly 275,000 German and Italian troops. The Wehrmacht's premier desert fighters, men who had pushed the British back to El Alamein and earned Churchill's admiration, were now prisoners. Among them was Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter, a recipient of the Knight's Cross and a veteran of the campaigns in Poland and France. The path from capture to enlightenment started in the transit camps of North Africa. As Richter and thousands of other POWs awaited transport vessels, the efficiency of the Americans was already starting to undermine their prejudices. But nothing could have readied them for what they would find in the American heartland. It wasn't just the material wealth they would see, but the cultural sophistication of a country they had been trained to look down upon. The first clue appeared on the Liberty ships that transported them across the Atlantic. In the enlisted men's mess hall, a projector had been installed. Feldwebel Otto Kraus, captured with the 15th Panzer Division, later remembered their journey to America. He recalled being shown a film, Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator. German soldiers were watching a Jewish actor parody their Führer. They were torn between feeling offended and amazed. Most of them had never seen Chaplin, as his films had been outlawed since 1933. Prisoners were allowed private radios, and films were screened up to 4 nights a week. If a camp lacked a projector, the prisoners would often pool their money to buy one. The U.S. military had stumbled upon a significant discovery. Hollywood movies were proving to be more persuasive than any propaganda lecture in showcasing American values and industrial might. On August 15, 1943, at Camp Clinton, Mississippi, the base camp had recently finished building its theater. This facility, constructed by the prisoners themselves, could accommodate several hundred men. 25 generals were interned there, in addition to various colonels, majors, and captains. General Gustav von Wiedersheim, one of the most senior German officers at Clinton, stood at the rear of the hall as the lights went down for the first screening. The movie was Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Von Wiedersheim later described it as incomprehensible. He noted that it was an American film that depicted corruption within their own government, with a naive man challenging their political establishment and newspapers criticizing their leaders. In Germany, such a film would have led to the deaths of everyone involved, and yet the Americans were showing it to their enemies. The cinema became a vital tool for re-education and propaganda, as well as entertainment, utilizing Hollywood anti-Nazi films, cartoons like Hair Meets Hair, and the Why We Fight series. The American World War II movies shown typically focused on the war in the Pacific. The projection equipment itself became a source of fascination. The camps utilized 16mm Bell and Howell projectors, machines that operated so smoothly that German technicians, who took pride in their mechanical skills, would spend hours examining their design. Unteroffizier Friedrich Becker, an engineer from the Zeiss Optical Works, remarked that the precision of the American projectors was superior to anything they manufactured. They could run for hours without issues, and the sound synchronization was flawless. It became clear to them that American technical dominance was present in every sector. On October 3, 1943, at Camp Hearne, Texas, the prisoners had a theater that even included an orchestra pit for their own elaborate plays and skits. But on this night, German POWs filled the theater for a special movie. The film was Mrs. Miniver, MGM's Academy Award-winning picture about British fortitude during the Blitz. Hauptmann Erich Müller, a Luftwaffe pilot who had participated in the bombing of London, sat in the third row. He would later recount the experience, stating that they had destroyed British cities and knew the extent of the damage. Yet he was watching a film that portrayed British courage with so much empathy and humanity that German soldiers were moved to. Tears for British civilians. Joseph Goebbels himself reluctantly admitted the drama's powerful effect. He said Mrs. Miniver depicted a family's fate during the war, and its sophisticated, potent propagandistic leaning was something they had only dreamed of achieving. He noted that not a single hostile word was said against Germany, yet the anti-German sentiment was perfectly conveyed. The movie's technical quality astonished the German officers. The cinematography by Joseph Ruttenberg, the musical score by Herbert Stothart, and the seamless editing all displayed a level of filmmaking artistry that German cinema could not match. Even more unsettling was the film's emotional impact. These Wehrmacht officers, many of whom had been part of the London raids, found themselves feeling sympathy for British victims. Winston Churchill famously said the film did more for the war effort than a flotilla of destroyers. The German prisoners were starting to see why. November 1943 was a pivotal moment for the film program. The Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office decided to start screening Frank Capra's Why We Fight series for German POWs. The choice was not without controversy. These films repurposed captured German footage, including clips from Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, turning it against its creators. Academy Award-winning director Frank Capra, though intimidated, was also impressed and motivated by Leni Riefenstahl's 1935 propaganda piece, Triumph of the Will, and worked in direct response. His objective was to use the enemy's own materials to show American soldiers the gravity of the enemy's cause and the righteousness of their own. He planned to assemble enemy speeches, films, newsreels, and newspaper articles alongside a catalog of their hostile acts. Camp McCain held 7,700 prisoners, Camp Clinton 3,400, and Camp Shelby 5,300. At Camp McCain near Grenada, Mississippi, the initial screening of Prelude to War sparked a commotion. SS officers tried to stage a boycott and were promptly moved to Camp Alva, Oklahoma, a special facility for die-hard Nazis. However, most prisoners watched, captivated by seeing their own propaganda reframed as evidence against their cause. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote that seeing the Nuremberg rallies, which once filled them with pride, now presented as proof of their militaristic aggression, was like viewing his life through a different perspective. Everything was the same, yet completely inverted. The series accomplished something unforeseen for the German POWs. It gave them a context for Germany's actions that even they had not fully grasped. Many prisoners had never witnessed the full extent of Nazi rallies, heard Hitler's speeches in their entirety, or understood how their country was perceived by the rest of the world. What surprised the German POWs the most was Hollywood's readiness to criticize America itself. In December 1943, Camp Shelby screened John Ford's The Grapes of Wrath. The film's portrayal of American poverty during the Depression, its critique of banks and authorities, and its sympathy for ordinary people contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had taught them about American capitalism. Oberfeldwebel Friedrich Hoffmann, a former Nazi Party education officer, commented that the Americans showed their own shortcomings and injustices. He noted that no German film under Hitler could have depicted German poverty or suffering caused by German institutions. This self-critique wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a strength they could not fathom. The camp libraries started getting requests for John Steinbeck's novel. Soon, translation groups formed, with POWs creating handwritten German editions of American books they had learned about through movies. Instead of prohibiting this, the American camp officials encouraged it. Major Edward Davison, head of the Special Projects Division's education program, reported in January 1944 that the prisoners' interest in American literature had surged by 400% since the film program was expanded. They were eager to read the original sources of the films. Gone with the Wind led to interest in books on the American Civil War, while The Grapes of Wrath prompted curiosity about the Depression. A surprising source of psychological transformation came from Walt Disney. In February 1944, Camp Hearne started showing Disney cartoons before the main features. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, and Fantasia were sensations among the German prisoners. These were not propaganda. They were pure entertainment, but their effect was significant. Hauptmann Otto Kehl remarked that seeing Fantasia, a blend of animation and classical music with Bach and Beethoven interpreted through an American lens, demolished their notion of American culture as inferior. He was struck by the technical skill, the artistic creativity, and the pure joy of the work, noting they had nothing like it. Disney Studios also produced animation for the Why We Fight series, but the feature-length animations had the greatest effect on the prisoners. Many had children in Germany they hadn't seen for years. The emotional resonance of these family-oriented films, coupled with their technical mastery, created an internal conflict that formal propaganda could not. Unteroffizier Werner Braun, an artist from Munich, spent weeks trying to replicate Disney's animation methods. He concluded that American animators were decades more advanced. If they could achieve this with cartoons, he wondered, what else were they capable of? The screening of films became an educational experience in itself. German POWs were frequently tasked with projection duties, which involved maintaining and operating equipment that was a testament to American manufacturing prowess. The camps sourced their films from the Army Motion Picture Service, which supplied 16mm prints to military bases globally. By March 1944, the system was so efficient that films were being delivered to POW camps within 2 weeks of their cinema debut. These base camps offered most of the amenities one would find in a small town, including dentists, doctors, libraries, movies, educational programs, with English being the most popular course, and sports, with soccer being the favorite at Camp Shelby. Gefreiter Helmuth Wagner, a former projectionist from UFA Studios in Berlin, documented the American distribution network. He noted the constant arrival of new films, not selections from a propaganda ministry, but standard Hollywood fare like musicals, westerns, comedies, and dramas. The variety was astonishing. In Germany, they might see a dozen different films in a year. Here, they saw that many in a month. The durability of the film stock, which could endure thousands of screenings without major wear, surpassed anything German chemical engineering had developed. Dr. Friedrich Müller, a chemist from IG Farben held at Camp Clinton, examined Technicolor film through a magnifying glass while on projection duty. He observed that the 3-strip color process demanded a level of precise coordination that was beyond their industrial capabilities, from the chemical stability of the dyes to the alignment of multiple negatives. Each step, he realized, represented years of progress they had not made. Perhaps no genre was more shocking to the German POWs than American musicals. In May 1944, Camp Hearne screened Yankee Doodle Dandy, featuring James Cagney as George M. Cohan. The film's spectacular patriotic scenes, the vitality of the tap dancing, and the fusion of music and story represented entertainment as ideology. Yet it was so skillfully made that even a resistant audience was captivated. Feldwebel Hans Richter observed that they had been told Americans were uncultured. But then they saw Yankee Doodle Dandy. It featured hundreds of dancers in perfect unison, songs that made one want to march, and production values that must have been incredibly expensive. And this was entertainment, not the output of a propaganda ministry. The musicals also highlighted something else: American racial integration, even if limited. When stormy weather, with an all-black cast including Bill Bojangles Robinson and Lena Horne performing at the highest artistic level, was shown at Camp Shelby in June 1944, it challenged Nazi racial doctrines. While America had its own racial issues, the very existence of such films and the celebration of black performers were inconceivable in Nazi Germany. Within 2 months of arriving, the Germans had decorated their mess halls with paintings, chandeliers, and Christmas decorations, and hung family photos on the walls. The camps had evolved into communities where German culture blended with American influences picked up from the movies. By the autumn of 1944, American combat films started to be shown in the camps. These were not movies about fighting Germans. The Special Projects Division was careful to avoid films that could stir up resentment. Instead, they screened movies about the Pacific War, which allowed German POWs to witness American military strength without feeling personally targeted. Guadalcanal Diary showcased American military ingenuity and resolve. 30 Seconds Over Tokyo displayed bombing capabilities that were far beyond what the Luftwaffe had accomplished. Action in the North Atlantic depicted the heroism of the merchant marines in maintaining crucial supply routes. Korvettenkapitän Otto von Münden, a U-boat commander held at Camp Clinton, watched action in the North Atlantic with a professional eye. He noted that the film showed anti-submarine strategies they had never faced. He concluded it was either Hollywood fiction or the Americans possessed capabilities they were unaware of. Given everything else he had seen, he feared it was the latter. The combat films also served another function. They portrayed American self-sacrifice and heroism in a way that humanized the enemy. German soldiers, who had been taught that Americans were cowards, saw films that depicted individual acts of bravery rivaling their own warrior code. April 1945 brought the end of the war in Europe, and with it, the most shocking films the German POWs would see. As American troops liberated concentration camps, the Signal Corps documented what they discovered. Within weeks, this footage was being screened in the POW camps. The films elicited shock, anger, and disbelief. Stunned and incredulous prisoners dubbed them Knochenfilme, or films of bones. However, many prisoners came to accept the footage as real. Following a mandatory viewing of an atrocity film, 1,000 prisoners at Camp Butner set their German uniforms on fire. At Camp Shelby, the screening of concentration camp footage on May 15, 1945, began with a statement. What you are about to see was filmed by American Signal Corps cameramen. No scenes were staged. No images were altered. The film lasted for 20 minutes. The theater, typically filled with noise, was silent except for the sound of weeping. Not all prisoners immediately believed the films. At Camp Hearne, several inmates claimed the footage was faked. The American authorities countered not with punishment but with more proof. Copies of German documents, statements from American soldiers, and additional footage from various camps. The sheer volume of evidence was undeniable. By June 1945, the film program had become a cornerstone of the extensive re-education initiative. Der Ruf, or The Call, was a German-language newspaper produced in Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, during World War II by captured prisoners of war. It was then sent to approximately 140 other POW camps across the United States. The paper ran for 26 issues during its time as a POW publication in the U.S. Far from being a drain on taxpayer money, Der Ruf actually turned a small profit. The newspaper started publishing film reviews and articles discussing their relevance to Germany's future. A representative review from August 1945 analyzed American cinema, noting that these films showed American soldiers returning home, grappling with peacetime, and questioning their sacrifices. The fact that America would produce such films, which showed doubt and hardship, instead of just victory parades, demonstrated a maturity they needed to learn. Democracy, it concluded, means showing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The prisoners chosen to go to Fort Kearny to write for Der Ruf were an intellectual elite selected from the various prison camps. These intellectuals, writers, artists, and professors chosen for their anti-Nazi leanings, became film critics whose reviews influenced how hundreds of thousands of German POWs interpreted American movies. The main objective of Der Ruf was to convince German POWs to concentrate on rebuilding their country's future and to renounce Nazi ideology. No director had a greater impact on the German POWs than Frank Capra. His films, such as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Meet John Doe and You Can't Take It With You, portrayed an America that was both idealized and self-critical, patriotic but also questioning. Frank Capra rose to become one of America's most influential directors in the 1930s, earning 3 Academy Awards for Best Director. His portrayal of American democracy, seen through the lens of Hollywood sentimentality, became the model for how many German POWs came to understand American values. George Marshall and even President Roosevelt acknowledged that Capra was Hollywood's foremost communicator to the general public. For German POWs, Capra's movies served as introductions to democratic principles, showing decency triumphing over corruption, individual bravery overcoming systemic power, and democracy as something not flawless but improvable. An unexpected source of ideological change came from Westerns. John Ford's Stagecoach, Howard Hawks's Red River, and other Western films showcased individual liberty, frontier justice, and self-sufficiency that resonated with German military ideals while undermining Nazi collectivism. Major Friedrich von Steuben observed that the Western hero, solitary, principled, fighting for justice without direct orders, was the antithesis of their military structure, yet they admired these characters. They embodied a freedom they hadn't grasped. The Western landscape itself left an impression. The immense open spaces and boundless horizons offered a sense of possibility that stood in stark contrast to the confined, regulated environment of Nazi Germany. The films served as portals to a physical and psychological freedom that the German soldiers had never conceived of. At Camp Shelby, prisoners started writing their own westerns set in Germany, imagining lone heroes battling against authoritarian regimes. These narratives marked the emergence of a democratic imagination among former Wehrmacht soldiers. The German prisoners at Camp Hearne, Texas, included members of a German military orchestra who had brought their instruments and later provided much-needed entertainment. For the camp, these musicians began to adopt American musical styles they learned from the films. Jazz rhythms started to appear in their music, and swing arrangements began to replace traditional martial tunes. Hauptmann Ernst Miller, the conductor of the Camp Hearne Orchestra, remarked that American film music opened up possibilities they hadn't considered. He noted the fusion of classical and popular genres, the emotional honesty and the technical skill. It was a musical democracy where various styles could coexist and enhance one another. By late 1945, POW orchestras were performing arrangements of American film scores for their fellow prisoners. Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz became especially popular, its lyrics striking a chord with men who were far from their homes. Hollywood's depiction of women had a significant impact on German POWs. Stars like Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, and Joan Crawford portrayed independent, intelligent women who were nothing like the Nazi ideal of womanhood. Woman of the Year, screened at Camp Clinton in September 1944, featured a female journalist who was more successful than her husband, a concept unheard of in Nazi Germany. The role of women in American films, not merely as decorative figures but as central characters, hinted at a society where one's potential was not constrained by gender. For men brought up in a strictly patriarchal culture, this was a revolutionary idea. While some resisted it, many started to question the restrictions imposed on their own wives and daughters. American comedy films succeeded where no propaganda could. They made German POWs laugh at authority and pomposity. The Marx Brothers, Abbott and Costello and Bob Hope, dismantled dignity with humor. Duck Soup, shown at Camp Hearne despite worries about its anti-war themes, had German officers laughing at the absurdity of military grandeur. Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator was finally screened in October 1945. The response was varied. Some prisoners felt offended, while others found it therapeutic to laugh at what had once filled them with terror. The film's concluding speech, Chaplin's appeal for humanity over hate, was translated and passed around in handwritten notes throughout the camps. In addition to Hollywood entertainment, POWs were shown American documentaries that highlighted the nation's industrial and agricultural strength. The City, the River, and the Plow That Broke the Plains presented American successes and failures with equal candor. These films, made by government bodies, were free of the heavy-handed propagandistic style of Nazi documentaries. Dr. Heinrich Bauer, an agricultural expert from East Prussia, watched the river with a professional's eye. He noted that it showed America's flooding issues, erosion, and farming failures, but it also showed the solutions being put into action. In Germany, he reflected, such problems would never be acknowledged. This honesty about challenges, paired with the confidence in overcoming them, was far more persuasive than any form of boasting. The Hollywood star system was a source of fascination for the German POWs. The concept of actors as celebrities independent of state oversight, able to choose their roles, critique studios, and even poke fun at political figures, suggested a level of freedom that was beyond their Nazi-conditioned understanding. When the prisoners discovered that Clark Gable had enlisted as a private and flown combat missions, and that James Stewart was piloting bombers over Germany, it shattered their perception of American celebrities as decadent and cowardly. Marlene Dietrich, the German actress who had become an American citizen and entertained the troops, was an especially divisive figure. Her films were both cherished and condemned, seen by different prisoners as acts of either betrayal or bravery. By Christmas 1945, the cumulative influence of watching hundreds of Hollywood movies had achieved what military defeat alone could not: a thorough transformation of consciousness for most German prisoners of war. A survey of about 22,000 prisoners revealed that 74% of them left with an appreciation for democratic values and a positive view of their captors, while only 10% remained staunchly Nazi. The final report from the Special Projects Division stated that motion pictures were their most powerful tool for conveying American values. Films achieved what lectures, books, and discussions could not. They allowed prisoners to experience American democracy emotionally, rather than just understanding it on an intellectual level. After their return to Germany, Alfred Anders and Hans-Werner Richter, along with several others from Fort Kearny, started a new newspaper, also named Der Ruf. This version of Der Ruf eventually reached a circulation of 100,000. These former POWs would go on to establish Group 47, a literary circle that would be a dominant force in German literature for many years. Christmas of 1945 was a high point for the film program's influence. Special holiday screenings were organized for German POWs, featuring movies like Going My Way and Holiday Inn, which showcased American celebrations and values. At Camp Hearne, thousands of German prisoners watched these films that portrayed everyday American life with its joys and sorrows. The movie's technical brilliance, elaborate production numbers, sophisticated cinematography, and emotional manipulation through editing and music showcased American filmmaking at its finest. But it was the film's humanity that had the greatest impact on the prisoners, revealing a society that could find joy even in the midst of hardship. As German POWs started their journey back to Germany in 1946, they took with them the memories of American films that would influence their country's rebuilding. Many of them went on to hold important roles in West German society, applying the lessons they had learned in darkened American theaters. POWs were assured by the Geneva Conventions and International Treaty that they would receive food, clothing, and medical attention equivalent to that of their captors, but they got something more: a cultural education that would shape Germany's democratic path. This influence was not limited to the elite prisoners. Thousands of ordinary German soldiers went home with new perspectives. They had witnessed racial integration in American musicals, female independence in romantic comedies, and the dignity of workers in social dramas. These images stayed with them. American films didn't just alter the German prisoners. The prisoners' reactions also changed the American perspective on cultural diplomacy. The film program's success shaped American occupation policies, leading to the creation of Amerika Häuser, America Houses, across Germany, where American films were screened for German civilians. The Motion Picture Export Association, seeing the effect of films on POWs, pushed for wider distribution of American movies in post-war Germany. By 1950, American films were dominant in German cinemas, continuing the cultural shift that had started in the POW camps. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, surviving German POWs organized a reunion at Camp Hearne. More than 300 former prisoners came back, many with their families, to show them where their transformation had started. Former Obergefreiter Hans Müller, who had become a film distributor in Hamburg, addressed the reunion. He stated that they had come to America as enemies, as Nazis and as believers in racial and cultural supremacy. They departed as friends, as Democrats and as men who had seen a better way of life through the window of cinema. The reunion featured screenings of the same films the prisoners had watched 4 decades earlier. Mrs. Miniver, Why We Fight, and Casablanca were shown again in the Camp Theater. Former adversaries, now allies, watched side by side. Americans and Germans united by their recognition of cinema's power to transform. Former Hauptmann Wilhelm Richter gave the main speech. He said that Hollywood had given them what no military victory could, a vision of what they could become. In American films, they saw not perfection but potential, not propaganda but dreams made real. The films taught them that strength is derived from diversity, prosperity from freedom, and that culture thrives without state interference. The scale of the film program in German POW camps highlights its systematic nature. It involved a film infrastructure of over 380 camps with projection equipment, an average of 4 movie screenings per camp each week, and 16mm prints supplied by the Army Motion Picture Service. Thousands of films were screened across all camps between 1943 and 1946. Film consumption is estimated to be in the millions of individual viewings by German POWs, with the average prisoner watching 150 to 200 films during their time in captivity. A wide range of Hollywood entertainment and documentaries were shown, including both new releases and classic movies. The cultural impact was significant, with thousands joining film discussion groups, Der Ruf publishing detailed film reviews, and many prisoners keeping personal journals of the films they watched. This exposure also influenced their post-war career paths. Post-war psychological research confirmed the deep impact of Hollywood films on the consciousness of German POWs. Exposure to American commercial movies achieved a more profound psychological effect than formal education programs could. The films bypassed intellectual barriers connecting with the emotional core where ideology is formed. They worked through various means, fostering emotional connections with American characters, showcasing alternative social structures, demonstrating prosperity achieved without conquest, and framing individual freedom as a strength rather than a source of chaos. Entertainment fostered positive feelings about American culture in a way that propaganda never could. Different film genres influenced the prisoners in unique ways. Musicals conveyed a sense of joy and energy that challenged German stereotypes. Westerns depicted an individual freedom that aligned with military honor, while undermining collectivism. Comedies taught that authority could be ridiculed without leading to revolution. Dramas portrayed a psychological depth on par with European art films. War movies humanized American soldiers while refraining from demonizing their opponents. Each genre carried subtle ideological messages that, over time, contributed to a comprehensive shift in worldview. The sheer variety of films suggested a pluralistic culture that was completely foreign to Nazi conformity. Beyond their cultural influence, American films offered a technical education that shaped post-war German development. Prisoners studied cinematography, sound engineering, color technology, special effects, and distribution networks. This technical insight was invaluable in rebuilding the German film industry after the war. Many former POWs took jobs in cinema-related industries, introducing American techniques to German productions. They applied methods learned from watching Hollywood films, which helped to modernize German cinema in the 1950s. The films demonstrated democracy, not through political discourse, but through their storytelling. Hollywood movies commonly depicted individual agency, social advancement through hard work, criticism and reform of institutions, the coexistence of diverse values, and redemption through personal growth. These recurring narrative themes, seen across hundreds of films, helped to build new mental frameworks for understanding society. The films also unintentionally provided an economic education. Prisoners witnessed consumer culture, labor relations, entrepreneurship, a market economy, and financial systems that operated without government control. This economic knowledge was useful when the prisoners went back to help rebuild Germany's economy. Many gave credit to American films for helping them grasp the market principles that would fuel West Germany's economic miracle. The influence of Hollywood movies on German POWs went far beyond their time in captivity. Former prisoners became political leaders who brought democratic values to German government. Educators who taught American studies programs, Business leaders who used entrepreneurial models, cultural producers who made German films with Hollywood influences, and social reformers who pushed for changes inspired by American social dramas. The transformation was so thorough that by 1950, West Germany had become America's most steadfast ally in Europe. This swift change from foe to friend can be partly credited to the cultural groundwork laid by cinema. Historians have described the film program as one of the most successful soft power initiatives in history. Without force or traditional propaganda, American commercial entertainment reshaped the consciousness of an enemy. German prisoners were quartered in barracks that accommodated up to 50 men. Every 5 barracks shared a mess hall with cooks, waiters, silverware, and, by all reports, excellent food. But in addition to physical comfort, they received a cultural immersion that altered their worldview. The program was successful because it was based on attraction, not argument. The films didn't dictate what the prisoners should think. They showed them different ways of thinking. Entertainment turned into education, stories became ideology, and dreams led to political transformation. On April 15, 1946, the last group of German POWs at Camp Hearne was getting ready for their return home. The final movie they were shown was The Best Years of Our Lives, which portrayed American veterans grappling with peacetime, an honest depiction of challenges that resonated with men who were facing their own uncertain futures. As the credits finished, the lights in the Camp Hearne theater came on for the last time. The German prisoners walked out, not as the Nazi warriors who had entered 3 years prior, but as men who had been transformed by the influence of Hollywood's dream factory. They had been shocked, enlightened, and ultimately changed by the simple act of watching movies. Their experience is a testament to the power of culture over ideology, the victory of soft power over hard force, and the profound reality that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a bomb, but a well-told story. German POWs had come to America anticipating a weak and fractured nation. Instead, through the lens of Hollywood, they found a civilization so self-assured it could critique itself, so affluent it could create pure entertainment, and so advanced it could produce art that went beyond propaganda. They had watched American films and it changed them forever. In their transformation lay the origins of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic rebuilding of Germany. They had witnessed democracy acted out on the screen, and they would dedicate the rest of their lives to trying to build in reality what Hollywood had shown them in dreams. The German POWs were astonished by watching Hollywood films in American POW camps, but more significantly, they were changed by them, and in that change was the groundwork for a better world, one film at a time.